Now, Nigeria's next election is already being shaped, not by voters, but by delay. With less than 2 years to the 2027 general, in fact, less than a year, general elections, concerns are growing that the legal foundations of the vote itself remain unfinished. The Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC, is warning that the National Assembly's failure to pass a new electoral act risks leaving the country to approach another election cycle without the reforms needed to protect credibility, certainty, and public trust. While the House of Representatives passed the bill before recess, the Senate did not act, freezing a process that must move in lockstep before the law can take effect. PLAC says electoral laws are not last-minute instruments. They require time, clarity, and preparation. Without them, institutions improvise, confidence erodes, and democracy enters an election year already on uncertain ground. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the constitutional lawyer, human rights advocate, and executive director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, or PLAC, Clement Nwankwo, who was the original convener of the Civil Society Situation Room and is a well-known advocate of electoral reform in Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles.
Now, your organization, PLAC, which, by the way, works pro bono with the National Assembly on technical issues, says this delay could undermine the 2027 elections. What specifically is at risk if a new electoral act is not passed soon?
We do need time for preparations for the elections. We do need certainty in the electoral laws and legal framework. Both international instruments, including even ECOWAS protocols, a Nigerian constitution, and in fact the Electoral Act stipulate the need for certainty in electoral law. When you look at the Constitution and you look at the Electoral Act, the Electoral Act is quite clear in saying that you must give notice of election 360 days before the elections. Those 360 days, it's still in the current 2022 Electoral Act, so it's not a problem. But there are announcements and pronouncements and stipulations you need to put out in terms of that notice being issued. And I think for a lot of us who have worked very closely, and I must say that the National Assembly has been fantastic. The Senate and the House are going through a process of deliberations, review, conversations, and actually do have a document. It's the question now really of prioritizing the passage of this. And from the deliberations within the committees, the Senate and the House committees on electoral matters, those committees have worked very closely together. I have seen incredible collaboration and cooperation, irrespective of political party leaning, by both chambers to come up with a document that the House has now passed. The Senate has not passed it. And for us, it's really to say to the National Assembly, please prioritize this. You can't continue to delay this. If you look at the legislative agenda of the Senate, the legislative agenda of the House of Representatives, it's quite clear that this would be one of the bills that is passed as quickly as possible. The Senate President has spoken to it. The Speaker of the House of Representatives has spoken to it. The leadership, the chairman of the two committees, Senator Olalong and Honorable Balogun in the House, have all worked very assiduously to get the two committees to come up with a draft document. So really it's just say, we will prioritize this, and time is running out.
Right. So how much time is realistically left before electoral reform becomes ineffective rather than useful? In other words, is there a point beyond which passing this law becomes cosmetic rather than consequential?
I think it's always useful, given that the situation has been created, that everyone is expecting this, that there is just about 12 and a half months to go. If we're looking at the elections that was held in 2023, you have 12 and a half months to go before elections are conducted again. So that's assuming that elections will be conducted as happened previously in February and March of 2027. So you really have to have certainty, and that certainty means that both houses should have passed the Electoral Act in 2025. The president should have assented to it no later than December 2025. So really, I can't project to say that you need any further time for the National Assembly to consider this. And if the National Assembly is resuming in the next few days, I would think that after the meet and greet returning session, that they will immediately decide that this act must be passed that week.
Right. Now as you said, the House passed the bill. The Senate did not or has not. From your engagement, why has the Senate stalled? Is this about legislative procedure or political reluctance to tighten the rules of the game?
No, I don't see any reluctance. Like I said, I have seen both chambers work, even the leadership. They are all pleased with the document that they have. It's really to say, please, let's prioritize this. So that's what I see. I don't see any malice. I don't see any political shenanigans going on. I don't see anything other than really prioritization. And I say that because the president submitted a list of ambassadors just like a day or two before the National Assembly took a break. The Senate confirmed this immediately. So when you see those types of prioritizations, it means that the National Assembly or the Senate that hasn't even considered it has not given the Electoral Act the priority that it deserves. So that's why we're saying, look, come back to work, deal with this immediately, so that the commission, which is headed by a new chairman, has that certainty of legal framework to do its work.
So what does the absence of a new law, a new electoral act, prevent INEC from doing? I mean, can INEC still run credible elections under the current framework or not?
Yeah, it would seem to me that INEC is able to do so. There are a few amendments that were made, proposals that are contained in what would now be the 2026 Electoral Act, if it is passed and assented to by the president. And those would be the processes of election, which INEC can still implement. Now, there is no default in terms of INEC continuing its preparations for the elections as we speak. It still is able to use the 2022 Electoral Act to announce, give a notice for the elections, which it must give 360 days. If you look at the new proposal, it doesn't change. So it means that INEC would still be in good time to measure 360 days within the time frame that has been set for elections to be conducted.
And Clement, you're well known in this country as an advocate of electoral reform. You're a human rights advocate. You're a constitutional lawyer. The public have a good deal of trust in you. Does delaying electoral reform confer advantage to any political actors? In other words, who benefits from delays and ambiguity? Let me put it that way.
I think what has happened with the amendments that have been proposed is that the National Assembly looked at some of the suggestions made by election observers, whether it's international observers or Nigerian national or domestic observers, and the National Assembly took some of that into consideration in passing or proposing the bill that is sought to be passed right now. And I would say, as someone who is very familiar with election administration and conduct of elections, that the draft or the proposals that the National Assembly has today on in the 2026 Electoral Act bill is good enough to help the Commission conduct a credible election.
Better than 2023?
I think usually the problem is with those who are conducting the elections. The legal framework is there. If those who are conducting elections are honest and want to run a good elections, they would be able to do so. So at the end of the day, the Commission has to show itself for what it is. And that's why we would be keeping an eye on what the Electoral Commission is doing. We would be able to honestly say to the Commission, you are doing right or you are doing wrong. So the law is there. Implementation is a different thing.
Nevertheless, you're worried about this particular delay. And I wonder what mistakes from previous elections make this delay, in your assessment, dangerous. Have we seen this movie before, and how did it end?
Well, we did see under the former President, General Buhari,
right,
a failure to assent to Electoral Act on 3 consecutive occasions for the purpose of its own, whatever the reason it was that it did. And of course, we knew how incompetent that administration was. But the point here is, it doesn't seem to me that there is anything controversial in the proposals that are being put forward, or anything that would not be, that would create a crisis for anybody.
Yeah, but what I'm wondering is, based on your assessment, because you've been doing work with the National Assembly, you've always been an advocate of electoral reform. Based on what you saw on those 3 occasions from the previous government that you were talking about, how did the delay affect the elections? Was it affected in a negative way, in your assessment, that affected the confidence of the public?
Well, you know, those laws had to go through certain processes, including getting INEC then to say whether the elections, the law would help it implement the elections. And we did see on some occasions INEC pointing out what it felt would hinder it. We did see on some occasions the Attorney General writing his opinion to President Buhari to say, don't do this. And we did see on the last occasion, before the new one was passed, the advice that said that, look, we have now gone too late towards the elections, and so we cannot be signing into law a new electoral act when you've only got a few months to elections. And that's really what we are concerned about.
That's what you're trying to avoid.
That's what we're trying to avoid, because a lot of work has been put into this particular bill. And I think it would be a shame if it is not taken as seriously as a lot of work that has been put into it. And that's why we're saying to the Senate, complete your own part of the deal. The 2 houses of the National Assembly harmonize the bill if there are any differences, but at the time of presentation, it was the same drafts that both houses were considering. And then it goes to the president for assent, and hopefully it is a process that the presidency has followed closely as well, and the president should be able to assent to the bill as soon as the National Assembly passes.
Right, and just briefly, I mean, what are the key changes that you see in this new electoral bill that would move the elections in this country forward and give greater confidence in 2027?
I think that quite a few things, but a whole lot of it is really just dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
In other words, clarifying things.
Clarifying a whole lot of things. You know, candidates for elections, for instance, have complained that it is the party that nominates agents for them. And so the party nominates, and where the party is not interested in a particular candidate, they either do not nominate agents to represent them or nominate agents who are not loyal to their own candidacy. There is some clarification even here now regarding the issue of transmission of election results, the importance of the IREV result collation portal, and so on. So these are some of the issues that have been sought to be clarified. The issue of how you can register as a voter, what you require to register as a voter. If you remember, in the last elections, there were several incidents of underage voting, foreign nationals being handed voters' cards, and so on. So some of these processes is what the new Electoral Act has sought to address.
Right. And just briefly tell us about the work that you and your organization, the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center of PLAC, do with the National Assembly.
We believe, and I personally have gone through very difficult years in this country under military dictatorship. And the difference, and it doesn't matter how much we criticize the National Assembly, I think that's well placed, that we should be able to say to the National Assembly, you can do better. But the difference between dictatorship and democracy or civilian rule is the National Assembly. And so it's very important for us as PLAC to support the National Assembly to improve its processes, to become much more able to deliver on citizens' expectations. And so that's why PLAC's role in supporting the processes of the National Assembly, legislative reform, legal reform, constitution review, and so on, goes on. Because we believe that if you are able to bring about changes at that policy level and increase the ability of the National Assembly to deliver on citizens' expectations, we can salvage our democracy, and that's why PLAC is continuing in its work of support to the National Assembly.
And you are, of course, one of the big voices advocating for special seats for women in Nigeria's national and state assemblies. How is that going?
We hope it does get to pass. Again, it's one of the issues that needs to be resolved. The voting on constitution review should have happened before the recess in December. And now it's spilled over into 2026, and it's important that as soon as the Electoral Act bill is passed, hopefully in the coming days, that the National Assembly will also put on board the voting on constitution review, which includes special seats for women. If you look at the seats for women in National and State House of Assembly, it's 999 seats. Only 54 are women in the National Assembly, in the State House of Assembly.
That's pathetic.
It's pathetic. In fact, 15 states do not have women represented at all.
Totally pathetic.
So for us, it's a shameful thing that you go to meetings and you're being asked questions. Even the leadership of the National Assembly, when they go to IPU meetings, the International Parliamentary Union, the African Parliamentary Union, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Union, they are being asked, don't you allow women to run elections in your country? So for us, I think that the National Assembly should decide that the special seats for women would be its legacy. Because if it fails
Does
to
it look
pass
like that's going to happen?
I pray that it does happen.
Right.
And it's an important thing. The House of Representatives is quite clear that it would like to see additional seats in one per state in the House of Representatives. The Senate needs to clarify what it wants, but whatever it is quite clear that the National Assembly will lose a lot of credibility were it not to pass this bill.
Right.
So we do hope that the National Assembly understands the deep importance of the special seats for women bill and ensures that it passes.
Well, we're going to be watching them very closely to see what happens with that. But, I mean, it's not every day that we have you here, Clement, and you're seen, as I mentioned before, as a very sort of somebody who's trusted by the public and as a very objective assessor of developments within Nigeria. Can you speak to the performance of this APC government? How would you assess them so far?
I would prefer to speak to the performance of this government. I'm not looking at the parties,
right?
Because I have to be careful to avoid partisan conversations. But it's important to say that Nigerians expected a lot from this government when it won elections in 2025. I'm not quite
2023,
sure.
you mean?
In 2023, yes, sorry. I'm not quite sure what the manifesto was. I haven't quite seen the manifestos that the parties had at the time. But the administration came in, made some pronouncements that were very difficult for citizens to take in. Those pronouncements, those decisions have had very serious impact on citizens. The removal of subsidy, which was a very corrupt regime that they removed, which was welcome, but done in a way that has created incredible hardship for citizens. The removal of subsidy on Naira has also meant that these two factors have combined to create incredible inflation in the country. So for a lot of citizens, living standards have deteriorated deeply.
But could you ever have the kind of reforms that everybody in this country knew this country needed without some belt tightening and pain?
I like the belt tightening for everyone. Is it for everyone? I don't see that. It's like belt tightening for the people, but not belt tightening for those who are in charge of making these decisions.
That's a good point.
So what you have seen is profligacy. What projects are being done, nobody knows. We are having conversations and we're told that we are still implementing the 2024 national budget. The 2025 budget has not been touched. And for a lot of people, the amount of money that the country is earning right now is incredible compared to before the administration. And people are asking the question, where is the money going to?
Yeah, but if the Naira has been devalued substantially, then there isn't a significant difference from what it used to be.
Yes, maybe. But the volume is a lot more. And when you put it side by side, even with the exchanges, you would see that the country should, revenue-wise, be in a better state. But in terms of development, in terms of construction of infrastructure, in terms of providing social needs, people are not seeing where the revenue is going. And people are seeing government officials squander money. People are seeing government officials live large and not tightening their own belt when they themselves don't even have sufficient waist to hold a belt.
That's an interesting way to end the conversation. I want to thank you very much indeed. Barrister Clement Nwankwo is a constitutional lawyer, human rights advocate, executive director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center of PLAC. He was the original convener of the Civil Society Situation Room, and he's a well-known advocate of electoral reform in Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed. Good
Thanks
to see
a lot,
you.
Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.